So I just want to share 3 observations about target from the Bible. So there's geographic and segment focus, but it expands through equipping and mobilizing the saints. So what do I mean by that? Luke 10, what does Jesus do? He mobilizes the 72. He's expanding his influence. Acts 19:10, Daniel, is where Paul says that when he had been in Ephesus for 2 years, the whole region of Asia Minor had heard the gospel. Why? Because he was equipping and sending people. And then in 1 Thessalonians 1:8, Paul, to the best of our knowledge, did not spend a long time in Thessalonica. It says that he was there for 3 Sabbaths, maybe a little bit longer, but in 1 Thessalonians 1:8, it says that the gospel is ringing out of Thessalonica. So, yes, there's geographic and segment focus, but through the equipping and mobilization of saints, we see the gospel spreading to other segments, to other peoples and other places. So either I had a thought or a dream last night. Still don't know which one it is. But last night I had a thought or a dream. It sounds cooler to say a dream, but I don't really know if it was actually a dream or not. But I had a thought and or dream about Libyan Arabs being reached by Moroccans. Because if you know anything about Libya, as an American, you basically can't go to Libya. It's not safe, and you just can't actually go. But one of the few countries that Libya allows people to travel into is Moroccans. And you think, but most Moroccans are Muslim. There's very few Moroccan believers. But if someone has a geographic and people group focus of a Moroccan Arabs, you could raise up and mobilize believers to reach Libyan Arabs. That's what Paul would have done. When we think of the Nehemiah, he sees adversity. He doesn't give up. What does he do? He pivots. So if someone is pursuing a vision among Libyan Arabs, some people would look at that and say, I can't go to Libya. There's not a lot of Libyans in the U.S. I'll just give up. But maybe the Lord gives someone a dream, a vision to say, use the Moroccans. Reach the Moroccans, they'll reach the Libyans. That's the idea of same culture, close culture. The other observation is the Bible shows us to focus on the gaps. Romans 15:20 talks about proclaiming the gospel where it's not yet been proclaimed, not building on someone else's foundation. And I think this is key as we think about defining the target and the strategy coordinator. As the strategy coordinator or the pioneer, we can move on when there's a beachhead of local leaders established within a target. In pioneer missions, our role is to establish a beachhead. What is another way of saying what a beachhead is? What is a beachhead when we're talking about missions?
Mature believers within that culture that are also sharing and discipling people.
Yeah. So you've got believers with the DNA who is sharing and discipling others. So you have disciples who can make disciples, who can plant churches. That is the beachhead. And it may not be as big as you think, right? We want to see a DNA of healthy reproduction among disciples and churches. That is the beachhead. The church is the beachhead. And we see that in Acts 24-12. That was my passage scripture I was mentioning from Acts 20, I believe. So then I want to pivot. I think you get why segments or target is important, but why do we segment targets?
So we can go deep. Like you can't dig a very wide well, but you can dig a narrow well.
Yeah. We want to segment targets because there is differences between segments that keep the gospel from flowing freely. And if I focus, I am able to go deep so that I can have a disciple who knows how to make disciples with a DNA that knows how to make disciples. Natalie, do you have something?
Yeah, I was just gonna add that it helps to like not feel overwhelmed by your target and help you like best strategize how to start somewhere.
Yeah. Great. There are a lot of people I know that would say that their end vision is no place left, meaning no place left where the gospel has not been proclaimed. But if I stop there and I never segment, I have to answer the question, what do I do on Monday morning? Does that make sense? You don't know where to start. Daniel.
I think it's kind of along those lines, but like it helps you be systematic and like track. So like if in DFW, if there was 50 people saying we want to reach Arabs here, but like we don't have any specific things, we could all be going to the same neighborhood in Richardson and not even know it. As opposed to being able to like, okay, cool, I'll take this small segment, you take this small segment, and you're able to work more efficiently and more systematically.
Yeah, very, very good application from Nehemiah. That's what Tom was saying is even though there was a larger vision, people were taking smaller segment chunks. Any other thoughts?
Sure looks like a waffle.
Does look like a waffle. So if you remember the illustration from last week, all of those little waffle divots are barriers of the gospel. And if we don't segment, ultimately what happens is people miss the gospel. People don't
Yeah.
worship God rightly.
I was just thinking it could be easy to get discouraged if you have like a huge target and you might not really know where to start. But yeah, if you have a smaller one, it can feel a little bit more tangible and something you can get your hands around.
Yeah, we want people to steward big vision, but if they don't know what to do or if they don't know where to start, it's not helpful. So when you think of, let's just take India for example, and I say I have a vision of reaching India. That's like this whole big circle, and there's a lot more little waffle things, and I have no idea what to do. I don't know what language to learn. I don't know what language to print my resources in. I don't know where to start. I don't know where to go. But if I begin to say, I want to reach this language group in this city from a Hindu background, even though that still may be 10 million people, I know what to do on Monday morning. I know what language I need to be learning. I know what I need to get Bibles, what language. So at the very least, I like to think about segments, oftentimes to the people group level, but sometimes just to the language religious level. And so that's one thing that we can look at is I just want to give you some context of how you can segment targets. Some are they are all helpful, but they're helpful in different ways. So these are pretty common terms and numbers. So I'll start at the top. So if you think of like layers, at the top is the affinity block. So this would almost be like regions of the world, but not always, because like Arab peoples is an affinity block. And there's only 16 of them in the whole world. So saying that I want to reach an affinity block is probably not super helpful. So like if I was to say I want to reach the Arab world, I kind of put myself in a situation where I don't know what to do on Monday morning. It's not as bad of an example as saying I want to reach India, because there is some shared linguistics, there's some shared history, there's some shared culture, but probably not the best way to really get to engagement. The second layer, which is there's 269 people clusters. And so within each affinity block, they're closely related people groups. And so typically they're related around language, but sometimes it's culture, religion, economy, or dominance. So like, for example, people clusters, Afghans is a people cluster. So as you probably know, Alex, you can fill us in, approximately how many people groups would be made up as an Afghan?
I would say 4.
Yeah, 4 or 5, something like that. So it's gathering them all together as that identity. I would say the same thing as Kurds is a people cluster, even though there's probably 4 or 5 or 6 different people groups. The people cluster is really good for mobilization, education, research, and it's a good beginning point for engagement. Then each people cluster has multiple people groups. So you've probably heard it said there's like 17,000 people groups. That's not actually true. It's about 10,300. And the reason there's that discrepancy of about 7,000 is because people have started cataloging the same people group in another country as a totally different people group. So in reality, it's not a different people group, but it's a people group in a different place. So it kind of gets the waters muddied just a little bit. So it's about 10,300 people groups. And the definition of a people group is for strategic purposes. And I would say for evangelistic purposes, a people group is the largest group through which the gospel can flow without encountering significant barriers of understanding and acceptance. So if you come back to the waffle, if we think of it, let me get my little drawer. I'm just trying to be super, super handy. An affinity block may be something like this. Lots of people groups. The people cluster may be just a couple. But then once you get to the people group level, that's one square. Because it says there's no barrier of acceptance or understanding of the gospel. So we're trying to fill this guy up with the gospel because it's lacking. But there's also a designation less, like more specific than that. And this is where you find yourself really in country of origin, not really in the diaspora. So the last level is what we call Unimax. And this was a term that was brought forward by a guy named Ralph Winter. He says it's the largest group within which the good news can flow. And notice this caveat, as a church planting movement before encountering significant barriers of understanding or acceptance. So it's very similar, but not just the gospel, but church planting movement and encountering significant barriers. So really the Unimax is an unlimited. So you start to segment even among people groups based off maybe socioeconomic status, maybe based off of geography. But the Unimax is really more for in country of origin. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how this plays out in our context. What do you need to be looking at? Out of those levels.
Excuse me, Bud, would you explain what a significant barrier is? I understand linguistic barriers, perhaps. What is the largest group within which a good news can flow without encountering significant barriers of acceptance or understanding? Of course, if you're talking to Muslims, the very fact that they are Muslims is a significant barrier to acceptance and understanding.
Yeah, so whenever you think of acceptance or understanding, so you mentioned linguistics, so linguistics always creates a different people group. Then if you think of socioeconomic status, so within India, for example, you may have people that are of the same linguistic background, same geography, same religious background, but a different caste. The caste becomes a barrier of acceptance or understanding.
I would say people group.
Okay. Let me ask Alex, whenever you are trying to mobilize and allocate resources for your work among Afghans, are you talking about them in their people group, like Pashtuns or Hazara?
Typically not. I talk about like just Afghans, but we've kind of just been working with Hazaras because they are super open typically. But I guess, I don't know. I guess I don't have an answer for you. Sorry.
Okay, but you did say that you typically speak about them just more as Afghans, right?
Yeah, so that would be like that would be a that would be a people cluster, right?
That'd be a people cluster. Yep. What, maybe one other person. Because it's not a right or wrong answer. It's just how this is applying to your situation.
And in my situation, like it's more the people cluster too, like with Arabs in general. Like with trying to mobilize or like get people to pray, we ask them to pray for Arabs, but not specifically for like Levantine Arabs or Iraqi Arabs or something. But and then also when I'm out visiting people and trying to share the gospel, it's a lot of times like there might be 4 different Arab nationalities in the same room.
Yeah. So
And-
for Arabs, that Arab world is an affinity block, not even a people cluster.
Mhm.
And so in your situation, in the purpose of strategy, mobilizing, resourcing, allocation, and collaboration, Arab world is a great term to use. So now, which one do you think is best for engagement in a globalized diaspora setting? In a globalized diaspora setting, do you think people group or people cluster would be more advantageous to use?
Maybe people cluster just because there may not be as many people in your people group represented like in the diaspora region that you're working in.
Yes, absolutely.
I think also, I probably have heard you also say this, Bud, but as people get into the diaspora, their own identity generalizes a little bit. So someone who may have been a Jordanian Arab may now be like a Levantine Arab or just an Arab globally. That may be how they identify themselves. So if you go too specific, that may not even apply to those people anymore.
Yes. So final question on this section is which one do you think is best for engagement at the tactical level in country of origin?
I would say people group.
Yeah, people group or Unimax. So all of that to say is I want you to see there's different classifications that are useful in different ways. And it's not that one is necessarily better or worse. It's just discerning what is best to help you define your target. Because remember, we're talking about defining our target. So what Daniel was saying is that in the urbanized diaspora, identities get broader and allegiances get narrower. So what I mean by that is if you have traveled overseas, you have manifested this, and someone asks you where you're from. Cody, if someone asks you where you're from, what do you tell them?
America.
Yeah, you don't tell them Peoria, Illinois. Right?
Right, right.
And if we think of our culture, is someone from Peoria different than someone from Southern California culturally?
Yes.
Yeah, but you just made your identity broader. You're from America. The same thing happens with people who move to the United States is in their home country, they may associate to a tribe, they may associate as to a clan, but it becomes, oh, I'm just from this country. And then the longer they're here, it may even just become a region. Oh, I'm from South Asia. But typically it becomes related at the socio political level of a country rather than a people group. And what I mean by their allegiances get narrower is because there are fewer. Think of allegiance as like people that they trust. The people that they trust at a deep level goes down because they don't typically have that clan or that tribe that had established that high level of trust in the diaspora. And then for geographic segmentation, you guys get this, but you can go from macro to micro, from the country level to the state level to like a county or district level to an urban core to a neighborhood. So whenever you're defining whatever term you use to define your people group, whether it's actually people group or a people cluster, you also need to look at what is the geographic segmentation. Is it the country? Is it a district? Is it an urban core? Or is it maybe a neighborhood?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I understood the broader identities, but narrowing allegiance, what, can you say what you meant by that again?
Yeah, so if I take Somalis, for example, how trusting are Somalis of one another?
Not at all.
Not at all. But
Well,
in country of origin, within their family structure, within their extended family tribal structure, there is a level of trust.
Yeah.
The
Yes.
trust breaks down outside of tribal or clan segmentation. So whenever someone moves to the diaspora, that tribal clan basically disappears. And so like that had been their level of trust. And so almost every diaspora people group, especially from a Muslim background, struggles tremendously with trust. But it's because their clan, their tribe has evaporated. That had been their level of trust. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
yes.
So their allegiance gets really small because they may only know a couple people from their tribe. Yes, they will interact with other people, but like at their deep level of allegiance, it gets really small.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
And that's common within a lot of people groups. All right, so how do we answer to what extent? So it's people, and we talked about the different people designations. We talked about place. We didn't spend a lot of time on that, but I think you understand geography. How do we answer the question to what extent?
Sometimes they're using a percentage of penetration among a people group, like 2% of a people group having received believers' baptism is considered, the group is considered reached for certain purposes.
Yeah, a lot of times the unreached people group designations using a percentage. But if you're thinking about you individually defining your target, because that's really what we're pressing into tonight, is defining the target, your people group, and your place, and then what are you saying is to what extent? And I'm fishing, but think back to the definition of a strategy coordinator. What is the goal of the strategy coordinator?
Want to
Well, I think the 2% number is like they're able to reach their own people. It's like a water level that's like they're able to then reach their own people at that point. And I think for strategy coordinator, it should be the same thing. Like until there's enough internal multiplication that they can reach their own people.
Yeah, absolutely. That they've owned the task themselves to reach their own people. Or another way of putting it, tying it back to our definition of a strategy coordinator, is there's been local ownership of the core apostolic task. That the DNA is planted of disciples making disciples and churches planting churches. Remember, we talked about the 4 fields. We've taken the 4 fields, we've dropped it into this people group in this place. It's taken root, it's multiplied, and it's multiplying. That's the what extent. Now we can further nuance that and add a percentage. We can further nuance that and say we want to see 4 streams of, 4+ generations of multiplication. We can add any of that, but I think the irreducible minimum is we want to see local ownership of the core apostolic task among this people in this place.